Hello, in this video we're going to be looking at using the edit table to hold information about images, and then we'll have some functionality to display those images based on the cell selected in the edit table and a few other things. We'll have all of that right after these few words. Hi, you're listening to Martin, and this is my next video in my series looking at getting started with OpenInsight 10. And today we're going to finish off this form. So if we go to the second tab, we previously dropped on the awaiting image and the edit table. Doesn't quite look as it does now. And we had an edit line along the bottom and a single button. Now, I'm not going to build this form. I'm going to use the system that I've already pre-created. The reason for that is I'm going to be going over so much stuff that we've covered a million times, creating images, creating forms, and all of that sort of stuff. I thought it'd be easier just to talk through what I've done, and I'll show you the code, but you should be able to just rearrange your screen so it looks similar to mine. Now you'll notice that I've got a rogue edit line at the top here. This is just a standard edit line with a EDL underscore default image. It does have a database association, so if I was you, I would drop it on using the data bound controls here, and then you will need to potentially create a few additional dictionary items. If I go into open and we go entity and we go down to the where are we, OpenInsight tables. So in the MP apps table, I believe you will be missing image paths, image notes, and image default. So you might want to create those, with image paths and image notes both being set to multi-value. Otherwise, nothing overly special about those particular dictionary items. So the first one of those, image default, you hook up to the edit line, and then we're done. Now you'll notice that I've added a few more buttons in here and a few new graphics and assigned those. All very straightforward. I've left those as normal buttons rather than making them flat buttons because I just prefer the look at them. You could make them flat if you wish to, simply by coming across here, setting the flat to true, changing the background color to transparent, and then you'll just have the image but without the grey box around it. I'm just going to set mine back again to the defaults because that's how I prefer it to look. So on the edit table, you will need to add a number of columns. Now, if you added your edit table using the common controls, then you're going to need to add the data binding. It won't work in the data binding area here. You're going to need to go into columns, and you will need to set up the database association in here where the data binding is. And we want to have the image path, and again, nothing overly special in here. I think the only thing that I've changed here is for the text alignment to be centered because I prefer it, and also the text alignment to be center left for this particular cell. Notes is exactly the same, centered, but I did set the notes to be auto size, so you might want to do the same. If the user decides to rearrange this window, you might want that cell to become wider. I then had an additional column that I added called ZM, or short for zoom, and in there I set the cell type to be button. There are a number of different cell types. You can have default, you can have checkbox, button, drop down edit. In this instance, it's just a button. Otherwise, everything is okay. I did set the width, I think, to 25. And for the del, which is to delete or remove that particular row from the table, again, I set it to 25. And we set the cell type to be a checkbox. Otherwise, with regards to styling, we set the auto side width and height to true. So if the window is sized, then that will size accordingly. I set the column header height and the row height just to what I fancied having them set to. I did set the focus rectangle color, so this is the border around the cell that we're in, to red, and I made it solid and a 2 pixel. 2 pixels actually probably a little bit heavy, so I think I'm going to drop that back to 1 pixel. I then did my usual by turning on the row stripe, by setting the scroll bars, having them always show. So I've just gone for the vertical scroll bar. We don't really need a horizontal in here. And the rest pretty much just down to your personal preferences. I think that I did actually set the column header sorting mode to a single click in there. Otherwise, pretty much whatever you want it to be set to. With regards to the events, now there are a number of events on here. As you can see, I've done them as scripts. You could quite easily drop them into the commuter module if you want to, but for ease of putting this video together, I left them as scripts. And you can see that we've got 3 scripts on here. However, if we open up the script, then you'll notice up here where we've got the events, you can see more clearly that we've got a pos changed event, which is a script, a cell click, and a click, all scripts. If it was a quick event, there would be an orange Q in the box next to it. So if we just go to the top for the cell click, when we click the cell, we're going to initially set the delete button according to whether the box is ticked or not. So if it's ticked, we'll enable the button. If it's not ticked, we won't. So the first thing in here that we need to do is to get the cell that we're in, so cell pos. That gives us a column and a row. We can then get the information, and then if it's column 4, then we will remove the row from the table. Don't worry about the zoom thing at the moment. This is some code that I'm working on for the next video, and you'll notice that I've got a debug in here because I've got a problem with the code. I'm still working through it, and we'll be looking at that code next in the next video. So then we also have a click event on this particular control, and this is going to refresh the images as the user moves up and down the table. So again, we use cell pos to find out which cell we are in, and then assuming we're in column 1, because other things will happen on the other columns. So if we are moving around in column 1, then we run this little bit of code here, which again is just going to get the cell positions, and then it creates an array, and then as we move up and down, we're going to set the image accordingly. And then in the pos changed, this is exactly the same code as the click, but in the pos change, this is where somebody would arrow up and down. So I guess it might be overkill, the fact I've got it on the cell clicked and the pos change, but I've done it on both. Okay, so that's the 3 events that we have on the table. So we'll just come out of there and back to the form. We then have our image path edit line, and on here we just have the single script. So don't worry about that code at the moment. I'm going to do another video about interacting with the status line, and that's not actually working yet. That's some more work that I need to do. But what we want to do here is to clear the current image and reload the image with the image that's assigned to the current record. So this way we are always showing the correct image, either the waiting image if there's no record loaded, or there isn't any images for that particular record, or if there is a default image, then we're going to want to show that default image. So Path to bitmap we basically get from a EDL image path edit line. We will then set the bitmap accordingly. So this is the BMP underscore image control with a bitmap property, and this is going to set the BMP default. So in other words, the default image that we've created earlier in OpenInsight. Otherwise, we won't show the default. We will show the path to bitmap, and we'll drop that path into the edit line, and then when that's changed, it will show the correct image. And then if this control is not empty, then we handle that as well with this block of code at the bottom. And then finally, we need to enable the button to enable the image to be passed to the correct control, because if we look at the buttons here, you'll notice that the find button is enabled all the time, but the add button, so this is going to add it to the table. The button to add the information into the default edit line is also disabled, as is the delete one. So that's just basically going to enable or disable the button accordingly. So that's the image path. Then to find the image, that's a straightforward click event, and in here we've got some code where we define the types of files that our user can look for. So I've got all files here, but I could decide to have less. But in the list, we're going to have PNGs, JPEGs, and bitmaps specifically exposed. We will then use the utility choose file to set the get BMP file, and then finally we will pass that value through to EDL underscore image path. Okay, let's go back to the next button. This button here is going to enable us to add the image into the edit table. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we've got an image path. If we haven't, then we're going to send a message. Let me just widen this. We're going to send a message to the user basically saying that you need to browse for a file. We can get the data from the edit lines, get the contents from the edit table, and then we're going to insert the new data at the top of each column. So we need to do that because if we've already got some data in the table, then we want to add the new data to the top rather than overwriting what's there or getting ourselves in a mess. So then we just update the edit table with the new data, and because we've done that, we'll then clear out the edit line accordingly. Okay, so for the next button, we want to be able to set the default image. This is so that this image will display when the record is launched. Again, a click event, and very simply, we get the new path, and we're going to pass that into the default image edit line. Nice and easy, that one. And then for the delete button in here, okay, I've got a debug in here. Obviously, this is where I'm working with this status line here, so ignore that code for the moment. But the code that we are interested in is to build a list of ticked rows, and then we'll remove those from the edit table. So we set the control array up and make a list. We then get the property for the data array and the list, and then this code here will then work our way through building up the list of the rows to be deleted, and then at the very end we delete those rows, and then finally we disable the remove rows button until we've got more buttons that are clicked. And again, ignore this status line code, we don't need that for the moment. We'll come back to that in a future video. So if you have done all of that, the only other code that I think that we've got on the actual window itself, I want to clear the image edit line when the form is cleared. So this is being done on a clear event. Now a clear event runs also when there's a write event or a save event, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to set the value of val path to nothing, and then we'll update the image path edit line with that value. So in other words, we just clear it out. So if we go to our main MDI window, if you haven't got it, you're going to need to have a button on there that launches the MDI child. And if I tab off, we will add a new record for Donald Duck. We'll have the appointments today at 12 o'clock. And then we'll pick Bridget as the doctor. And then if we tab across onto the images, you'll see because this is a new record, we have our awaiting image showing, and we have the path to that image at the bottom here. Now I'm going to leave this edit line visible because I like to be able to see when a new image has been passed into here. I've also got the default image, which is empty at the moment, visible, just so that you can see what's happening. It would make sense to make that invisible in a moment. But basically what we can do is we can search for a new image now, and I'll grab this one here, and you can see that we have got a bit of an edge here, but I'm reasonably okay with that for the moment. And we will add that to the edit table. We can then browse for another one, and we'll add that, and then we'll browse for another one. So you get the idea. You can just build up this list of images, adding them to the table. So we'll grab this one as well, add that, and the last one, and we'll add that into the table. So they've all been added in at the top. If I just move this across a little bit, then you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 added in the reverse order, and that's because we're adding them in at the top rather than the bottom. If I want to have this main one here as my main image, then I can simply click on the default button, and then we get the information held within this edit line. If I decide that I don't want to have scan number 3, I can tick it and delete that from the table. Okay, I've got a debug in here because I'm working on the status sign, so I'll just do a run, and it's actually removed it from the window here. Okay, so now as I'm moving around and just clicking, you'll see we've got our red line, and you can see that the images are being updated as we move around. And in the same way, if I use the arrow keys, then the same thing happens. So in the next video, we will start to add some notes into the system here. So I have to do, this is a note for this consultancy, and if we do a save and just bring back record number 5, make sure that your data is being saved. We'll use the zoom button so that we can actually see that information, because it's not very clear, and you wouldn't necessarily want to keep on moving the window around all of the time. In fact, you might even have the space to do that. So and if it's a very long notes for the consultancy, it may well not fit in here anyway, but we'll hold that for the next video. And in the meantime, I will look forward to seeing you on the next video when we look at that zoom feature. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you very soon. Bye bye.